In this video, we will continue to talk about rendering in 3D Studio Max. So we saw how we can create an exterior rendering using different parameters and the sun and the sky. And we changed the scenario from a day-night situation. So we can create sunset scenes, we can create dawn and dusk, and also we can simulate the night with the moonlight just by changing the parameters of the sun and the sky, which are basically a system of a distant light and a sky dome. So we can now proceed with other settings. We're gonna talk about the interior rendering using interior lighting, and we're gonna see again some techniques that we can use, some tools that we can find in 3D Studio Max. So we saw already how we can create an object rendering based on a single object, and this one is gonna be the exterior, and then we're going to proceed with the interior. We already saw different techniques, but we can use these tools and techniques also in the interior, like the HDRI or image-based lighting, and also the sun and sky. We can use natural light also, not only for exterior, but also for interiors. We can illuminate our scene using natural light and also artificial lights. And also we saw how we can use the 3D Studio Max sample files, which are going to be already set up for Arnold. And in the previous video, we opened a city scene to start to talk about the exterior rendering. And if we go here in the folders, we can find in the sign visualization also not only this exterior scene here in architecture, but also some interiors like this. These are really simple interiors. Well, if you're interested in architecture, you can also give a look to other software like SketchUp or Revit to create really easy architecture to drawings and 3D models. So you have some samples here that you can use. Also, you can see this is a scene imported from Revit. So if you use Revit or ArchiCAD, if you use BIM application, you can always import and then work here using 3D Studio Max. And we also saw how you can convert from any software and render engine into Arnold using the scene converter. So these are the learning scenes. We are gonna also use some of those to explain some of the effects that we can use with the exterior rendering and interior rendering. We talked about also the fog or the mist effect, the environmental fog. So we're gonna also see how we can use it to create effects with light. Now, if you wanna reach this learning scenes, you just go in the Autodesk Arnold page here on the official website, and these are all the samples that you can download and use to test. For example, the depth of field, the motion blur, a lot of effects that we're gonna see in this video concerning the camera. And you have some interiors also here. You can see you have an interior scene that you can download and use to test the natural light and the artificial lights and other settings that we're gonna use in this video. And you also have there the fog effect, which is creating here some volumetric light effect. The volumetric lights are due to the settings of the environmental fog or mist. So if you set up that, you're gonna have that the more visible light, which is gonna be like more volumetric. And here is a scene with the depth of field. It's another effect, which is due to the f-stop parameter in the physical camera, and also the motion blur, which is due to the shutter speed of the motion camera of the physical camera that we're gonna see later. So these are all effects again that you can open up from the sample scene and you can study from here. So we're gonna talk also about portal lights, which are particular types of lights which are not actually artificial, but they simulate the environmental light, the natural light coming from the outside. And we can use that with the volumetric effect or we can use them just simply by applying them outside the window. That is going to convey more light into your scene. So if you want to create an interior rendering using just natural lighting, well, probably you want to enforce that with a portal light. And also, these are other examples of volumetric light effects that you can create either in exteriors or interiors. And so we're going to talk about the camera and how the camera settings affects the exposure, which means how much light will get into your camera. And so talking about 3D Studio Max into your rendering. So by changing these parameters, you can get effects like depth of field, the shutter speed. It's going to affect the motion blur, but also they will affect the amount of light that is going to go inside your camera. So how much brightness you're going to have or how much darkness. So the depth of field, or also called DOF, is again about the f-stop. So you can see the values here. If you search for f-stop, you can use these in real cameras. So if you decrease the value of the f-stop, you're going to have a bigger opening size, a bigger size of the aperture. So the more you will open the shutter, and the more light is going to come in. So when you want to create depth of field effect, you're going to have more light. If you close the shutter, if you bring down the aperture, so you're going to increase the f-stop, you're going to have less light coming in your camera. So you need to balance all the parameters in order to have the effect that you want and the right amount of brightness. And these are other examples. So when you want to create depth of field, you need a focus point. So everything will in that focus point will be in focus, and all the other part of the scene will be out of focus. And so you can see here many different examples that you can check. And also again the shutter speed and the motion blur effect. Now the slower will be your shutter, the more you will have the motion blur effect. And also the more light will get in your camera because it's a really slow shutter. So the faster will be the shutter, the less you're gonna have the motion blur, and also less light will come in your camera. And then we have other effects that we can apply, like the camera vignetting, which are these like black corners of the image that is gonna make it more realistic. So this is our previous scene, and we're gonna use this one here, but instead of rendering from the outside, we're gonna create more cameras and we're gonna get into the inside of our scene. So I'm just going to use, you can see there are also some spotlights, which I already set up. And I will address again the physical sky, the physical sun and sky. So I'm gonna bring back everything to a day scene. So basically I am resetting everything as it was at the beginning. So we already mentioned that you either address the exposure, you change the exposure, or you change the intensity. So usually when you run a render using the standard setup, you're gonna have that really bright light if you are in an exterior. So also I'm going to clear the scene atmosphere of the fog which we previously used, and I will go here inside the sun positioner and also make it not like a sunset, but I'm gonna bring that higher. And now let's see the change. Now we saw that when you do this, usually when you create the first sun and sky, they are usually too bright. So in the previous video, we changed the intensity, but in this one, we're going to address the exposure. And we're gonna do that through the camera because we saw that the physical camera parameters like the ISO, the shutter speed, the depth of field, and so the f-stop, they all are part of a system. So you need to have that system balanced in order to have a nice rendering. Now the environment effects, panel, you can run a render preview every time. And you have a simple exposure right here. So the first thing you could do is just get here and just change the exposure from here. So there are like easy ways you can set up the exposure or EV, and there are some more complex parameters. So in this video, we're gonna see not the simple way, but the more complex way, which is through the ISO, the f-stop, and the shutter speed. So I'm gonna select the camera, and so we can start here with an exterior, and then we're gonna go into the interior, see how everything changes. So here it's too bright, everything is too bright. So if I go in the physical camera parameters, I'm gonna start here, first of all, by addressing the field of view. Now, also when you have a larger field of view, you're gonna have more depth of field effect. When you have a telescopic lens instead, you're not gonna have it. Now, if I increase the number there in the f, in the aperture, that's gonna mean that the aperture is gonna be more closed. And also, as you can see now, it's still too bright. So let's go back and let's continue. So if I change also the shutter speed, and you can also go there and change the ISO manually, or go to the target EB. So you see that if I set this to 0, I'm not gonna have any more light. And if I set this to be a low value, like 100 or 10, well, it's not gonna be so bright anymore. And also you can use the EV again if you want. And then you have temperature again to create a warmer or colder look to the overall scene. You can also add some you can add presets, or you can add custom color to be, which is going to override your scene. So it's you have different options. But first thing we can see here is that that's not overexposed anymore. Now it's well balanced thanks to the ISO. So you can use the ISO value anytime to balance again what you change with the f-stop and with the shutter speed. And you can see that I cannot see the interiors right now, because probably the light in the interiors is too dim, it's too low. So I'm perceiving those glasses as a mirror, and this replicates what happens in reality. So if the interior is dark, you cannot see the interior if the exterior is too bright. And you can use that if you don't want the interiors to show up. So if you don't want to take care of the interiors, just you want to render the exterior, you can also use like mirrors instead of glasses. So when we're going to start to bring in some light inside, we're going to see more of the interiors as well. So this is going to be just a simple scene. So I want to show you some other tools here. And talking about architecture also, one useful tool before we actually get inside and create an interior rendering, I want to show you some extra tips and tools that you can use for architecture, which is the section. So I'm selecting here all the structural parts of my scene, of my architecture, so that I can cut everything that I need. So let's assume that this will be my architectural part. So I can isolate with Alt Q. I can isolate, and also let's see here if everything looks fine. Okay, yeah. So we're gonna go in the compound objects again, and we're gonna use a boolean here, and I'm gonna unite everything together. So I'm gonna create an object out of these different walls and the windows also, because those are gonna be part of my section. So I'm just adding all these elements in order to create a single one, a single boolean containing all the different parts. So when I cut, I can only use one cutter, so one slice, and I can slice everything. Now also you can chamfer out the windows, but make sure that you take off the smoothing groups so that nothing is gonna look soft. So you can change like and just get rid of everything that looks like something like tension, or the metering make quad, and now everything it's kind of appearing straight. So make sure that everything looks straight and not soft. And so you can see here you can adjust with editable poly, like some face missing, or again some defects in the smoothing groups. So make sure that everything looks fine. If it doesn't, you should try with other tools that we already know. So you can slice with the modifier, slice modifier, and you can see we have a slice plane. So if you place the slice plane to a particular height, and usually for architecture it's about 100 centimeters, you can see I'm cutting to the exact place. So I can either split the mesh just by creating a new subdivisions, or you can remove the top part or the bottom part. I can also add a cap, so that if I want to do a section, I can see the walls cuts in that position. You can also change the material there. You can assign maybe a material ID from the current materials that I'm using. So I can create like multi-material and assign different IDs and then assign one of those IDs. Or just create a new material like a red material that's gonna be more visible. But this is just again another quick tip I wanted to show you. So you can see I have hidden everything else like the roof and all the rest of the stuff. So you need to be here like in the top view, and you need to deactivate, well, hide the things that you don't want to see. So if I select those and hide selection, there you go. Now I can see the section right there. And this is like a perspective section, but if I want, I can also, well, I can rotate, place it in a different position. But if I want, I can make it not perspective, but flat and orthographic. So it's going to be like more technical. There you go. So you can use this for technical drawing to present your project. And you can, of course, also render to see how it's looking, and be careful about, again, the exposure. So right now we're not using the camera. This is why it's looking overexposed. So again, I need to turn down the intensity of the sun or the sky, or go and change the exposure from the environment, because right now I'm using the physical camera exposure, but we are not in the camera. This is why it's not working. So I need to fix it using another exposure like logarithmic, and I drop down the brightness like that. It's gonna be less bright, so I can see now my render fine. So let's re-render again, and there you go. So again, it's just a matter of what you need to do. In this case, this is an exterior rendering, because I don't have a roof, I don't have a closed space, I have an open space. So I need to go back to the exterior render setup. So every time I change scenario, I need to address again either the exposure or the intensity of the light. So I'm going to create another physical camera right now, and I'm going to create an interior render finally. But you saw all those really interesting tools that can be helpful, and to explain also what we are going to do here. So you see the camera here now is too low, so I'm going to pan until I get into the position that I want. So I can use the various navigation tools and the depth of field. So now I can let's do the first render. And this is a new camera, so we didn't adjust anything yet. This is like how it is without any setup, and you can already see this too bright. And we are using now the physical camera exposure control again. So we can adjust the EV here, the exposure, or we can just play with the settings, the more advanced settings. This is what we're gonna do now. So I'm gonna select the camera, get inside, and start to work with the field of view first, if I want to adjust it. And not this was the wrong camera, this is the correct one. There you go. So if you want like more telescopic or panoramic lens, and then the aperture, now this is, I'm gonna bring this down to 1 or 2 because this is how the effect of the depth of field is gonna be more visible. If you have half value too high, it's not gonna be visible. And then let's see here what we have in the exposure. So this is the ISO, and I'm gonna decrease those because when you drop down the f-stop, you're gonna have more brightness. So you need to balance with the ISO, and always run a render preview and see what's gonna happen. You can see everything is too bright. So also I'm gonna change the duration of the shutter speed. So I'm gonna bring this value to 0.1, and now it's really dark. You can see that. So I just make the duration faster, so that changed the brightness. So it's too dark. So maybe something in between. I can either increase again the duration value, so to make it slower and more light will come in, or I can change the ISO, or I can increase the aperture, so the f-stop. So I'm gonna do a little bit of everything. So I'm gonna increase the aperture by decreasing the value of the f-stop, and I will also increase the duration, so that the time that is going to be open, the shutter, so it's going to be a slower shutter speed. And let's see what's going to happen. I didn't touch the ISO yet, and we can see already that I'm increasing the exposure. So let's see what's going to happen if I run a render. Now it looks fine for like an evening scene with no lights in the interior. I'm only illuminating the scene using the natural light, which is not too much. And remember that also to get rid of the noise, we talked about the noise earlier, you need to have light. If you have spaces that are difficult to reach by the light, you're going to have more noise. So usually we always want to add lights. And now I'm going to add a light just here outside the window. And this is going to be an Arnold light. And we're going to change it into, well, let's see here. Let's use a quad. So we can create a portal with this. A portal light will be a light that's going to be just outside the window, pointing towards the interiors and bringing light from the exterior. So I'm gonna also, I can use the resolution. I can use a bigger size so that it matches the size of the window, more or less. And there you go. So this is gonna bring more light into the scene, but it's not an artificial light. It's simulating the environment coming inside. You can see that you have the portal checkbox. So you can try before without activating the portal. It's gonna work, but it's probably gonna be visible and it's gonna be white because that's the default color. While if you use the portal, it's gonna get the color from directly the sky. You can see that it looks white, This looks like a white plane emitting light. I can also increase the intensity, and we can already see that it's starting to illuminating the scene. Now I want to create a region or a crop or a blow up to see just this part of the rendering, how it's going to change. So if I use a higher intensity here, you can see that it starts illuminating that part of my interior. So let's increase even more and let's see what's going to happen. There you go. Now it's definitely pretty bright and it's helping me with the interior lighting in this scene. Now I'm going to switch back to the view and I want to use Portal. So Portal, we will get the intensity and the colors of the sun and sky system. So the environmental light, the natural light, and it's gonna convey them into the interior. And again, let's do another region just to see the difference here between one and the other. I'm gonna render this, and you can see it's darker because the environment outside is not so dark. So to increase the intensity of the portal light, I need to increase the intensity of the environment of the HDRI, as we saw previously in other videos. So remember that you can simulate like the window, the light coming from a window, either by using a simple quad or using a portal, doesn't matter. Now, if you use a quad, just remember to make it invisible in the rendering. Portals are invisible by default. So I'm gonna do the same exact thing using that other window, which is gonna be bigger. So more light is gonna come in my scene if I use another portal right here, oriented and placed just outside the other window. So I'm gonna move it into position, and there you go. Well, actually gonna bring this into the center, and then I'm gonna increase the height and the width. There you go. Height and width, and that's it. So now we're ready to run another render test, and let's see what's gonna happen. Okay, I'm having just small changes here because the intensity of a portal light again is not like the intensity of a standard quad light. So I need to increase the environment, or I need to change the exposure. Well, let's just actually bring up the sun a little bit. You will see that I'm gonna have more intensity coming from the outside and coming from the portal lights. And there you go. So the exterior is starting to look pretty bright. As you can see, I have that ground on my environment sky, which is looking like a sea or an ocean, something like that. And now I want to move the sun into a position where I can see the sun coming in inside my room. So I'm gonna bring it right here. Let's do an active shade. So it's gonna be an interactive rendering that I can use now to place, there you go, the sun in order to get inside the scene. Now when the sun is gonna get directly inside the scene, it's gonna bounce then indirectly on all the surfaces. So this is another trick to have more lighting inside your scene. And also it's always a beautiful effect to see the sun getting inside the scene. And in the diffuse, I'm going to increase the ray depth. So I'm going to increase the indirect lighting and the accuracy of that. So it's going to have more quality and more accuracy. And also there in the environment lighting and reflections EBL, I'm going to increase the sample quality because that's going to increase the overall quality. So you should find the correct balance between the timing of the render and the quality. Now we can also add again the fog. So we can also create some volumetric effect. So I'm gonna add here the scene atmosphere. And the motion blur, we need something moving, so we're gonna see that with animation. And here in the environment background atmosphere, if we set this to advanced, we can change here. You can see interior only, interior, the portal mode to interior only. And we also can increase the samples of the portals, the bounces, the intensity multiplier, the shadows, and other stuff here that concerns the portal light effect. Okay. Now I want to switch this one here. I want to make it not portal, but a standard light. I want to change also the color a little bit. So it's going to be similar to the sky color. And I want to use this to simulate some volumetric light effect. So let's see here what's going to happen with this intensity. Also, you can increase the quality right here. You can see samples. So remember that every time you see samples, you increase them, you're going to have more quality. So let's render this. Okay. Now you can see on the left side the standard portal, and on the right side you will see the quad Arnold light with the volumetric lighting applied. But since we don't have too much darkness, we cannot really see the volumetric light effect. We need to have more darkness. But you can see I'm starting to illuminate the scene. So I don't want to see the light there, so I'm unchecking the light shape visible. So when I run a render, that's not gonna be visible. It's gonna be like projecting light, but without actually being seen. And it's just gonna take some time here because volumetric effects and the fog effects are a little bit too heavy to render. So you need to take time. Now to see everything better, I want to use I want to change here the sun and the sky. So I want to place this to a night scene just by moving that lower than the horizon and then re-render. So we can see that the portal light is not emitting any more light, but the quad light with the volumetric effect is continuing to emit light, even though it's invisible. So right now it's invisible. Now let's address the fog so that we can see this better. And I'm gonna go into the Arnold render and go all the way down. And set up the scene atmosphere, which is this one here actually. So let's increase the density. And let's see what's gonna happen. So we should see something already looking like volumetric light. And you can already see this is too bright. So we need to decrease the density. So I'm just gonna stop this. And let's place this at 0.1 and let's see what's gonna happen. So you can see that everything is like an experiment. You need to go there, use the effect that you want and just test it if you see if it's working. You can see we are starting to see something here, but it's still too bright, still too dense. But we can already see something. So I'm gonna either decrease the intensity of that fog or change the color, make it something darker, or I can also decrease the intensity of the light. Now I want to make this also attenuation color darker, and just try with 1 to the attenuation. And you also have some density texture there. You can use textures to simulate like noise, fog, things like that. Now let's re-render. Okay, now you can see it's getting a little bit darker, but probably the effect is too strong at the moment. So, but we can see it. We can see the fog, and we can start to see the environmental fog and the volumetric light. We can have a sense that that's more volumetric than before. Now this works better when you have a more concentrated beam. So this is like an area light, and it's not really concentrated, it's really diffuse, so it's emitting in many directions. Let's make it more directional to have a better visibility for that volumetric light effect. Now, by the way, you can also use these scenes that are gonna have the volumetric light set up already for you, so that you can study them and use it. So let's move on, and let's go for the other settings for the exterior rendering, so interior rendering. So you can see here I've added also some IS lights effects to represent some spotlights in the interiors. So this is how you can then finally give the interior rendering look by adding some artificial lights inside. So first you go with the sun and the sky, then you add some quad lights or portal lights to reinforce the natural light, and then you proceed with the interior lights. And you can see now that if everything is dark outside and bright inside, you cannot see the outside. So it goes the other way for the interiors. When you don't want to show the exteriors, you can do more of a night scene. So the reflections are gonna show you just the interiors reflected. So it's difficult to see the exteriors. And now I want to create some depth of field effect. So what I'll do here is have an aperture between 1 and 2, so I'm going to have a strong depth of field effect and enable depth of field. And you can already see it in the preview there. So you start to get a sense of what the depth of field is going to be. If I decrease the value of the aperture, you can see it's going to increase the depth of field effect until it's going to be like extreme. So make sure you don't exaggerate anytime. Everything needs to be always well balanced. Okay, let's leave it like this, and let's also check for the target. You can see we have a target distance. That's going to be the target of your camera. Now also the FOV, the panoramic, is going to increase the effect of the depth of field. If you use telescopic like this, also it's going to if you use telescopic, it's going to increase the depth of field. If you use panoramic, it's not going to show it if you increase it too much. So don't exaggerate with the panoramic views. And let's run render, and let's see the depth of field. And I think that depth of field is one of my favorite effects because it's really realistic. So just wait for the render to be done, and this is another effect that's going to take a lot of time to be rendered appropriately. So it's gonna have a lot of noise at the beginning, so you just need to wait for the render to continue to render all the passes before it actually gets rid of that noise. So this is going to be it for this lesson. We saw how we can use the camera and how we can use certain effects related to the exposure. We're going to continue in the next video also to talk about the motion blur.